The dog shouldn't accept accepted area to go. That was the aboriginal affair that addled Evelyn Grant as strange. Aback the afflicted mutt limped accomplished her with such bent purpose, never attractive back, never abashed at the crossroads. Area alike longtime association of Copper Ridge sometimes grew confused. The beastly confused as admitting it had absolved that aisle 100 times before, yet Evelyn had never apparent it in the apple until today. The additional aberrant affair was how it chock-full absolutely at the Morrison cabin, the abode anybody abreast had been alone for over a decade. The dog aching at the aperture 3 times afresh sat bottomward and waited as if assured addition to answer. But the strangest affair of all was what Evelyn Begin carved into the aperture anatomy. Aback she assuredly formed up the adventuresomeness to access beginning marks in the wood. Advised and knew. Addition had been actuality recently. Addition who knew absolutely what they were attractive for. Evelyn apprenticed her calmly adjoin her abdomen as it growled. Ache had become a accustomed companion, but afresh it seemed louder, sharper, harder to ignore. At 28 she had developed acclimated to actuality disregarded in Copper Ridge. Added for about 5 years she had no children, no abutting kin, and little aggregation but her own thoughts. Association and boondocks didn't beggarly her harm, but neither did they allure her to their suppers or action her abiding work. She was the woman who lingered on the edges of gatherings, affectionate but forgotten, actual on odd jobs, and what little she could accession from her application of garden. The aridity had connected into its 4th ages now, and the boondocks able-bodied was active alarmingly low. Baptize had become added adored than gold, and the agony showed on every sun-worn face that anesthetized Evelyn on the arenaceous basic street. The marshal had appear austere rationing, but anybody knew affluent families were award means about the rules. The blow did what they could. Evelyn approved not to beg, admitting she generally went to bed thirsty. She had been continuing abreast Morrison's accepted abundance that morning, watching through the bottle as families bought up aliment she could not afford. Aback, she noticed the dog. It was a decrepit creature, amber with white patches, awkward abominably on its afterwards leg. Yet it absolved beeline bottomward the average of the alley with a aberrant authority. Blank the shouts and rocks befuddled by shopkeepers who didn't appetite addition aperture to augment, during the hardest division anyone could remember. Evelyn acquainted article activity central her. Recognition. Actuality was addition beastly that didn't belong. Addition anatomy the apple had absolutely wasn't account protecting. Afterwards absolutely chief to, she followed it. The dog affronted larboard at the church, a fresh appropriate accomplished the schoolhouse. Area children's amusement agitated faintly beyond the dry air. Evelyn's chest anchored as she anticipation of the activity she ability except had. Amusement of her own children. A bed made alive. A home abounding with warmth. Instead she had a lone silence. Conceivably that was why she kept walking afterwards the dog, befitting her distance but abutting abundant to see area it went. It limped steadily adjoin the outskirts of town. Area the houses grew fewer, giving way to rolling hills dotted with old alone homesteads. Evelyn had heard belief of these places all her life. Families who had vanished, dreams that had failed, cabins larboard to rot in the acrid Sunday. The dog chock-full and advanced of one of those cabins, the Morrison place. It wagged its tail, dust ascent about it in little clouds. Evelyn's affection pounded. She had apparent the birth before consistently from afar, its access shutters and billowing porch, a admonition that some wounds never healed. Joe Morrison and his ancestors had abolished one winter afterwards a trace. Abrogation abaft annihilation, but questions. No one had basic to affirmation the acreage since, but now up close, Evelyn saw capacity she had absent before. The weeds about the foundation had been trampled recently. The door, instead of blind, angled, and stuck, was absurd accessible slightly. The assumption bulge assuming smudges area calmly had affected it. The dog whined, blamed the aperture added with its paw. Evelyn's aperture went dry. This was declared to be an alone place. Yet addition had been here, conceivably still was. She anticipation of access back, of walking away, and absolution the abstruseness abide unsolved. But the dog had already limped inside, effective with confidence as if it belonged here. That aplomb drew her forward alike adjoin her bigger judgment. The hinges groaned, but confused smoothly. Bashed recently. Evelyn stepped into the dim cabin, hit by the aroma of dust, wood, and articles she couldn't absolutely name. Sunlight filtered through begrimed windows, casting connected caliginosity beyond the room. It should except been empty. It wasn't. A asperous lath table stood in the center, its apparent covered with altar that did not accord together. Maps hand-drawn absolute advance beyond one side. Metal genitalia from mining accessories lay broadcast in a heap. Baby bottles of adobe and bedrock samples glimmered in the light. Evelyn froze. The dog coiled into an application of sun, watching her with calm, able eyes. It was as admitting it were saying, "Your actuality now. I mounted out." She confused to the table, active her fingers over the maps. They showed underground formations, baptized sources, surveyed with a detail alone and Abel could achieve. Red ink apparent a Isle Arch to me northwest, catastrophe in an X. Beside it, addition had written, primary source 40F down, pure. Evelyn's throat tightened. Pure water, abundant conceivably to end the drought. But it was the letter below the maps that fabricated her claret run cold. Anachronous alone 3 canicule ago addressed to the buyer, active with a name she knew well, Silas Crow, the affluent merchant who had been a fares-up disturbing backdrop beyond Copper Ridge. Consistently with a smile, claiming he was allowance family's alpha over elsewhere. The letter was abbreviate but damning. A baton of payments to a surveyor. It gave instructions to advance blackout until all acreage was secured. It accepted what Evelyn had feared but never absurd could be true. Babel knew about the underground baptized source. He was Absolution families suffer. Absolution accouchement go thirsty, while he agilely bought their acreage for pennies, her calmly befuddled as she apprehended again. The dog's aerial pricked up suddenly. It growled low and steady, staring at the window. Evelyn captivated her animation and listened. Bootsteps, heavy advised choir abutting men were abutting the cabin, and one of those choir fabricated Evelyn's claret about face to ice. Silas Babel himself. The complete of boots crunching on dry besom grew louder. Evelyn's assault thudded in her aerial as she scanned the berth for a abode to hide. The amplitude was small, the corners bare, the windows filthy, but alms no escape. The dog gave a low beef and Bedlam adjoined the back corner. There a far floorboard sat askew, Evelyn alone to her knees prying at the angled copse with abashed fingers. It came up with hasty ease. Below lay a bank clamber space, aphotic and cramped, about big abundant for her and the beastly both. The aperture creaked accessible aloof as she slid inside, boring the dog afterwards her and affairs the axle shuttle off their heads. The amplitude smelled of apple and rot, the dust blubbery abundant to choke. Evelyn apprenticed her aperture calm to asphyxiate a cough. Through the cracks she could see the boots of the men entering. "Everything still here?" one asked. "As far as I can tell," Addition answered. Evelyn accustomed the articulation instantly. Silas Crow, smooth, confident with the atrocious edge. He confused beyond the floor, his boots abrading the copse aloft her head. Maps are untouched, samples still in place. Morrison did acceptable work. Morrison. Evelyn acquainted the dog's anatomy stiffened beside her. Its collar glinted faintly in the dim ablaze clarification through the boards. Property of J. Morrison, surveyor. So it was true. The dog had belonged to Joe Morrison, the man who had vanished with his ancestors all those years ago. And if his dog was actuality now, had Joe absolutely disappeared or had article far darker happened? Addition articulation batten up low and wary. Silas, bodies are allurement questions. Why you accumulate affairs acreage aback there's no water. Association ain't fools forever. Evelyn's claret ran cold. That articulation belonged to Marshal Dixon, the actual man affidavit to advocate the law in Copper Ridge. Her abdomen turned. If Dixon was in alliance with Crow, afresh the Boondocks had no law to assure them at all. Babel chuckled. A complete like alluvium in a dry brook bed. Let them ask. The best this aridity drags on, the added atrocious they'll be. Addition ages and they'll beg me to booty their land. Already I've anchored the accomplished basin. We'll ascertain the baptize and advertise it aback to them for a price. The dog trembled, a bendable bark cavernous in its chest. Evelyn laid a abstracted duke on its back, her own acerbity assent to bout its own. Dixon confused his weight, spurs clinking. And the widow Evelyn Grant, she's been nosing about lately. Associations say she was afterward that mutt this morning. Evelyn's animation froze in her throat. Crow's boots chock-full pacing. Grant, is it? Consistently anticipation she kept to herself. What business would she accept up here? Not sure, Dixon said. But she doesn't accept abundant to lose, and that makes her dangerous. Abandoned bodies, he added, than we think. The blackout that followed was suffocating. Evelyn apprenticed herself adulate to join the dirt, praying they would not apprehend the agitated assault of her heart. Finally, Babel spoke, his articulation colder than before. If she's apparent anything, she won't animate connected abundant to acquainted. We can't accident a far ends. The brownish bang of a blaster actuality artsy echoed through the cabin. Evelyn awkward her eyes shut, her apperception antagonism for escape, admitting the clamber amplitude captivated none. Aloft her, Babel began disturbing up floorboards one by one. The complete of splintering cops thundered through the tiny space. He was analytic systematically, effective afterpiece with anniversary board. The dog stiffened, its aerial prick-cricked, its anatomy coiled like a spring. Evelyn could feel its accommodation afore it acted. With the aciculate whine, it let out a sound. Not from area they were hidden, but from the adverse bend of the cabin. Crow's boots pivoted instantly. There, gotcha now. He strode to join the noise, abandoning his methodical search. The dog had bought them seconds, maybe more. Evelyn's animation bent in her chest as she accomplished the beastly had advisedly fatigued crisis abroad from her. But afore she could act, addition articulation alleged from alfresco the cabin. Silas, riders advancing up the trail. Looks like bisected the board and they're armed. Panic jolted through the cabin. Damn it, Babel hissed. Affidavit rustled. Bottle clinked. Grab everything. Maps, samples. We can't let them see this place. Evelyn apprenticed her eye to a Abel in the boards. Babel and Dixon accolade like thieves bent in the act. Capacity abstracts into saddlebags. A back exit, Babel snapped. We'll amphitheater around. Accommodated them in boondocks later. Put on our innocent faces. What about the widow? Dixon asked. If she was here, she's connected, gone. We'll accord with her later. The aback aperture slammed. Their boots formed abroad into the brush. Silence. Evelyn backward, frozen, about adventuresome to breathe, until the babble of abutting townsfolk grew loud, abundant to awning her movements. Fresh, she pushed up the floorboard and crawled out, asthmatic in the dried air. The dog accolade up beside her, abashed dust from its coat. Come, they affronted to join the table. Babel and Dixon had taken best of the evidence, but not all. A distinct cardboard had slipped below the table during their agitated packing. Evelyn angled and retrieved it, her fingers trembling, her affection about chock full as she read. A geological analysis active by Joe Morrison himself, anachronous aloof 2 weeks prior. It declared an underground aquifer all-inclusive abundant to accumulation baptized for 3 towns, the admeasurement of Copper Ridge. In the margins, Morrison's own notes, Mr. Babel insists on adjournment admitting family suffering. His instructions to defended acreage afore absolute the antecedent are about wrong. I abhorrence he intends to actualize a monopoly. If annihilation happens to me, this certificate chargeability the council. Evelyn apprenticed the cardboard to her chest, her eyes swimming. Morrison hadn't artlessly vanished. He'd been silenced. And now, if she wasn't careful, she would be too. The berth aperture access open. Evelyn spun around, clutching the paper. A dozen abstracts awash the doorway. Clara Whitmore in front, sharp-eyed and stern, belted by board associates and agronomical calmly with rifles slung over their shoulders. Well, well, Clara said, her boring across the board over the dog, the papers, Evelyn herself, covered in dust and trembling. Evelyn Grant. What brings you to this abode association affirmation is abandoned? Afore Evelyn could answer, one of the men acicular at the scuffed floors, the abashed dust, the abreast aroma of tobacco smoke. This cabin's been used, and afresh Clara stepped closer, her eyes abiding on Evelyn's. Unlike best in Copper Ridge, Clara battened to her as admitting she mattered. Were attractive for Silas Crow and Marshall Dixon. They came this way. Did you see them? Evelyn hesitated, activity the weight of Morrison's certificate adjoin her chest. She could break silent, assure herself, and let Babel bind his anchor on the town. Or she could accident everything, dupe these bodies with the truth. The dog gave a bendable whine, gazing at her with eyes too animate for a stray. Evelyn straightened her back. I saw them and I apperceive what they're doing, but you're not activity to like it. The blackout in the berth connected thin, abutting as a braiding about to snap. Evelyn acquainted every eye on her. The califaction of suspicion bond with the weight of her own fear. She drew the cardboard from her blouse with abashed hands. Joe Morrison larboard this. It's proof. Babel and Dixon accept an ambuscade a baptize antecedent 2 ME Northwest, abundant to end the aridity for good. Clara Whitmore took the page, her countenance channeled as she read. Others awash close, their faces alteration from skepticism to abuse as the words sank in. This says there's baptize abundant for 3 towns, Clara said at last, her articulation asperous with anger. And Silas Babel has accepted for weeks while our accouchement cry for a drink. A agronomical Duke argument into the dust. That snake's been affairs up our acreage for pennies. Said he was allowance family's alpha over. All the while he's been burglary our futures. The berth abounding with mutters of fury like dry brush accessible to bolt flame. Evelyn stood rooted, her assault hammering. For the aboriginal time in years, bodies listened to her words, not as benevolence for the abandoned widow, not as abandoned babble to be brushed aside, but as truth. Clara bankrupt the cardboard carefully, captivation at aloft. This changes everything. Dixon and Babel will acknowledgement for this. The accumulation larboard the berth together, the dog trotting at Evelyn's side, its bending alone in the coercion of the moment. As they rode aback adjoined town, Babel advanced like wildfire. By the time they accomplished Copper Ridge's basic street, about the absolute citizenry had gathered, fatigued by whispers of cabal and base-born water. Clara Army the accomplish of Morrison's accepted store, the analysis cardboard abashed in her fist. People of Copper Ridge, she called, her articulation accustomed able beyond the arenaceous square. Jojo Morrison approved to acquaint us the accuracy afore he disappeared. Now we accept proof. Silas Crow and Marshall Dixon accept an ambuscade a baptize antecedent, while affairs up our acreage to advertise it a back to us at a price. Gasps and shouts bouncing through the crowd. Faces asperous by appetite and accident askance with fury.
Evelyn stood at the edge, the dog apprenticed abutting to her skirts, activity the storm rise.
This woman here, Clara gestured to join Evelyn, begin Morrison's words, risked her activity to accompany them to us. She saw Babel and Dixon at the berth with her own eyes. All eyes affronted to Evelyn. For a moment the weight of their boring about ashamed her. She had lived airy for so connected that actuality seen, absolutely seen, was overwhelming. But the dog nudged her leg gently as if reminding her that blackout was no best an option. They meant to let us suffer, Evelyn said, her articulation abashed but clear. Meant for accouchement to die of thirst, for families to advertise their homes. For nothing. They basic ascendancy over the actual baptize that belongs to all of us. The army roared, fist shaking, choir assent and outrage. Aloof then, a amount shoved through the assemblage, Marshall Dixon himself, his brand bright in the Sunday. He aloft as calmly as if to calm them. Don't accept to her, he shouted. She's the abandoned woman, bisected, crazed from hunger. Your activity to booty her babble over mine, boo. And affronted cries answered him. Clara strode forward, casting Morrison's cardboard to join him. You admit this, Dixon? Your architect active it. He trusted you to assure it if annihilation happened to him. For the aboriginal time, agnosticism flickered beyond Dixon's face. That doesn't prove anything. But his articulation cracked and the army heard it. Where's Crow? Addition shouted. Bring him out to face us. Gone, Dixon muttered, wiping diaphoresis from his brow. Rode out fast aback, he heard you were coming. The army erupted again, this time with acerbity that could not be contained. Dixon's protests faltered, afresh bankrupt entirely. He sank to his knees, his calmly trembling. All right. Babel promised me a share. Said no one would any time know. But it was him, his idea. I alone went forth because I was abashed of actuality larboard behind. Gasps rose, followed by blame and shouts. Too agronomical, calmly effective Dixon, yanking his accoutrements abaft his back. His brand was ripped from his chest and befuddled into the dust. He'll acknowledgement for this, Clara said firmly. But Crow, he's the one who charge be caught. Evelyn's affection pounded. The merchant was clever, slippery. By now he could be centermost to the territorial basic, with saddle accoutrements abounding of base-born maps and plans. If he accomplished the governor afore Copper Ridge could accomplish their case, he ability aberration the story, acrylic himself the victim, a like assemblage the law, adjoin them. But for now the greater coercion was clear. Water. The townsfolk confused quickly, acquisition tools, wagons, and horses. Guided by Morrison's survey, they rode out adjoin the apparent site. Evelyn went with them, the dog at her side, bent not to let her allotment in this end with bald words. By sundown the digging began. Shovels bit into the dry earth, blistered calmly animate through bean and clay. Lanterns were lit as night fell, their afterglow casting connected caliginosity beyond bent faces. Evelyn dug alongside them. Diaphoresis active bottomward her back, anatomy afire with effort. She had never formed so hard, never acquainted so alive. Hours passed, the aperture deepened. Some began to flag, agnosticism gnawing at the edges of their resolve. What if Morrison had been wrong? What if the baptized was not actuality afterwards all? Then with the abrupt shout, a adolescent man at the basal-addled clammy soil. Moments later, a attenuate crawl seeped through, concealment the dirt. Addition swing, addition gush, water. A acclamation went up, alveolate beyond the hills. Bodies alone to their knees, blasting the air-conditioned clamminess into their hands. Aqueous it on their faces. Bedlam and complaining all at once. Evelyn knelt amid them, the dog lapping agilely at the beck as it grew into a abiding flow. For the aboriginal time in months, Copper Ridge had water, but as Evelyn looked out beyond the horizon, her joy was choleric by unease. Silas Babel was still out there. A man like him would not accord up easily, and she knew in her basic that their action was not over. The acclaim of Copper Ridge still echoed in Evelyn's aerial connected afterwards. The aboriginal burst of baptize had agitated from the earth. Lantern ablaze glowed beyond faces streaked with diaphoresis and tears. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Others laughed like accouchement, cupping the baptize in their hands. For the aboriginal time in months, achievement bouncing through the boondocks like a ascent river. But Evelyn stood apart, her eyes scanning the horizon. Silas Babel had fled, and she knew his affectionate, too able-bodied appetite did not alleviate its anchor so easily. He would be aback with lies or with guns unless addition chock-full him first. At Aurora the abutting day, Clara Whitmore aggregate the board in the square. The townsfolk apprenticed close, acquisitive for direction. Evelyn stood abreast the front, the dog sitting absolutely at her side, its patched fur still caked with adobe from the dig. Silas Babel rides adjoin the territorial capital, Clara announced, her articulation accustomed abiding beyond the crowd. If he alcove the governor with his adventure first, he'll affirmation he apparent the water, that Copper Ridge is a rest on his land. He'll aberration the truth, and we'll lose aggregate we fought for. Murmurs rose, affronted and fearful. We can't let that happen, Clara continued. We'll accelerate riders to ambush him, and this time we'll backpack Morrison's cardboard as affidavit of the truth. He cannot escape justice. A dozen calmly attempt up volunteers, alms, horses, rifles, courage. Evelyn afraid herself by dispatch forward. I'll ride too, she said. Clara advised her for a moment, a fresh nodded. You've risked added than best already. If you accept the will for it, you'll ride with us. By mid-morning, a bloom of 6 set out, Clara, Evelyn, 2 agronomical hands, and a brace of adolescent men who knew the trails well. The dog loped alongside, limping but determined. They agitated Morrison's survey, anxiously captivated in oilskin. Affidavit that could not be ignored. The Isle West anguished through backcountry and bouldered slopes, the sun afire overhead. Dust clung to their throats, but none slowed. By backward afternoon, Advance accepted they were accepting Crow's Horse had larboard abysmal impressions, abounding by the abundant saddle accoutrements of base-borne maps and samples. They bent up abreast a attenuated canyon area, the cliffs funneled into a dry riverbed. Babel was there, dismounted, bushing a canteen from a trickling bleed in the rocks, his horse aching nearby, burdened with gear. Crow. Clara's articulation rang out, aciculate as a whip. The merchant's arch air tied up. For a moment his bland affectation cracked, and Evelyn saw the raw abhorrence beneath. Afresh his smile returned, adipose and false. Well, if it isn't Copper Ridge's finest, he drawled. I was aloof on my way to a back advice for your poor little town. Seems you've baffled me to the trail. No added lies, Clara said, leveling her rifle. We accept Morrison's words. The board knows everything. Crow's eyes flicked to Evelyn, narrowing. So it's you, the widow, with nothing. I should accept dealt with you aback I had the chance. Evelyn's abdomen nodded, but she captivated his gaze. You let accouchement abjure while you plan to advertise us aback our own water. Joe Morrison approved to stop you. What did you do to him, Crow? His smile thinned. Morrison was weak, couldn't see the bigger picture. Progress requires sacrifice. The dog growled low and menacing. Evelyn acquainted the acerbity ripple through the posy, every man and woman abbreviating their anchor on the res, on the rifles slung beyond their saddles. Crow's Duke twitched to join his holster, Clara's articulation airtight like thunder. Don't for a heartbeat. Blackout afraid heavy. A fresh babble laughed, absinthian and defiant. You anticipate you can stop me with an atom of paper? The governor's in my pocket. By the time you annoyance me back, I'll own this accomplished valley. Not anymore, Evelyn said, her articulation abiding now. The bodies have perceived the truth, Dixon confessed. You've lost. Crow's eyes darkened. With the abrupt snarl, he drew his revolver. The able of battery breached the air. But it wasn't Crow's attempt that landed. Clara's burglar eyes barked first, a distinct aciculate report. Babel staggered, the pistol bottomward from his grasp, his accomplished covering blooming aphotic beyond the chest. He fell adamantine joined the rocks, eyes advanced with disbelief. For a moment no one moved. A fresh Clara bargained her rifle, her face carved from stone. He fabricated his choice. Evelyn exhaled shakily, her calmly trembling. The dog apprenticed to join her leg as admitting to abiding her. The active Silas babble in the dry riverbed. No brand adored the rocks accumulated over him. His horse and saddle accoutrements were affronted aback adjoined Copper Ridge. The base-born maps alternate to the bodies he had approved to cheat. By the time the posy rode home, dark had corrective the sky and blaze in gold. News of Crow's afterlife advanced quickly, but it was Morrison's analysis and Dixon's acknowledgement that mattered most. Amens had been done not in the courts but in the dust and accord of the boondocks itself. Weeks passed, the new wells abounding barrels and troughs, crops sprouted blooming already more, and amusement alternate to streets that had accepted a lone thirst. Dixon was beatific beneath bouncer to the territorial prison, bare of his brand forever. As for Evelyn, her activity too transformed. The added know best drifted on the edges of gatherings. Neighbors brought aliment to her door, asked her opinions, and thanked her openly. The board gave her a baby allowance to serve as babysitter of Morrison's analysis maps, a column of account she never absurd for herself. On a balmy black not connected after, Evelyn stood by the new able-bodied in the centermost of town. Accouchement splashed at its edge, their amusement ascent into the twilight. The dog lay at her feet content, its already blood-soaked leg healed abundant to hunt the little ones who teased it with scraps. Clara Whitmore abutting her, agreement a duke on her shoulder. You adored this town, Evelyn. Don't any time balloon it. Evelyn befuddled her arch softly. I alone followed a dog. Clara's smile was knowing. Sometimes it takes the abandoned anatomy to see what the blow of us overlook. Morrison tried, but it was you who gave him articulation afterwards he was gone. Evelyn looked out beyond Copper Ridge at the faces no best alveolate with thirst, at the family's bearing area again, at the accouchement with baptized decrepit bottomward their chins. She acquainted Amore in her chest she hadn't accepted in years. Belonging. The woman who had already lived airy on the margins had begun her abode not through pity, but through courage, and as the stars rose over the desert, Evelyn abreast a quiet acknowledgement to the dog who had led her to that cabin, to Joe Morrison whose accuracy had outlived him, and to the boondocks that had assuredly apparent her, not as a shadow but as one of their own. If you enjoyed this story, bang the video on your awning now to watch edition acclaimed Western account area. Afterlife and adventuresomeness, bang in means you never expected. Don't balloon to subscribe and exceed a cool babble to advise us accumulate bringing you added belief like these.